a 17-year-old girl who was obviously showing signs of being trafficked. So they started asking some more questions and had her fill out a form. And in this form, she listed at the age of 17, she had already had 11 abortions and marked that every single one of them was forced.
Welcome to Straight Talk on Life Issues, the podcast. I'm Victor Nieves, joined as always by Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute. Today we have an incredibly important conversation that we're going to be having regarding protecting children and preventing child exploitation.
You know, Victor, everyone would agree that children should be protected and loved and not abused. And today we're going to hear from guests that demonstrate that evil is all around us. And we're going to hear about things we can do as individuals to help combat that stuff.
Yeah, evil really is, it abounds. Unfortunately, it abounds. And that highlights the importance of good people being sure to spread all of the information that they possibly can on how we can take a stand to protect these children. And Brad, like you said, we'll be talking about this in much greater detail with our wonderful guests. First joining us is Katie Fetzer. She's a professional child advocate. She's a speaker and entrepreneur. She's also a mother. Her fight for exploited children started in the trenches of America's front lines of child rescue and advocacy. Her deeply rooted faith in the justice of God has allowed her to engage in this critical work. As a former court-appointed advocate and an adoptive mom of rescued, exploited children, Katie daily lives with the long-term effects of child exploitation, which fuels her passion, and it is a passion, for prevention strategies. We also have with us Jennifer Guthrie. She's always been a voice for the unborn and an advocate for protecting them through public policy. In 2022, she worked on the Value Them Both campaign in Kansas, attempting to retain existing limits on abortion in the state. She's witnessed firsthand the exploitation of the most vulnerable while on mission trips to South Africa and Thailand. Those experiences developed a deep passion for exploited women and children. Those life-changing trips then led her to join Exodus Cry, an anti-trafficking 501c3. I want to thank both of you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Katie, could you briefly tell us about Empower the Fight?
Empower the Fight is a training-focused organization where we're focused on preventing child exploitation of all forms by educating the safe adults that are already in children's lives.
How long has it been in place, this organization?
We started our organization about 4 years ago, but the first 3 years we spent just doing research and collaboration with experts in the field and victims and those with frontline experience. So it's really only been kickstarted for the last year since we completed our pilot program.
Now, as a question to both of you, and Jen, we'll start with you. What is child exploitation? Is it the same as trafficking or child abuse, or is it different?
Child exploitation is a lot broader than I think the majority of the public understands, and we discuss it during our introductory program called Empower Safe Adults. It can be anything from using your child as a pawn during a custody battle to child sex trafficking, but we as a culture tend to just categorize it as a sex trafficking issue.
Katie?
So child exploitation, by definition, to exploit means to use someone else for someone else's gain or benefit. So when we're talking about child exploitation, we're talking about a broader scope of how children are used for other people's gain or benefit. So that encompasses a lot of different things. That could be something as simple as like a custody battle, like Jen is saying, or it can be something very severe like sex trafficking. But it's the use of a child. It's an anti-human view of a child, where a child is viewed as an object versus as the valuable human being that they are. So that encompasses many issues. That is what ties all of these issues together, is they're all connected. So sex trafficking is actually connected to the pro-choice and pro-life movement. It's all connected together because it's an exploitive mindset that justifies the harm of children for someone else's gain or benefit.
Give us a sense of the width and breadth of child exploitation. Do you have any statistics to share?
Yeah, so like physical exploitation is one of the easiest for us to cite because we have federal reports that we can look to. And we can also have a lot of expert opinion. So physical exploitation, so physical harm, like the child is being abused or sexually trafficked or sexually abused. We have an estimated 15 million children in the United States each year. So to bring that abstract number down to reality, I mean, 15 million is almost incomprehensible. It's the same as 1 in every 5 households. So as you're driving to work today or as you're out and about, I want you to just count every 5 houses. And that is the statistics that we're talking about. This is a widespread issue. It's in all demographics. It's in affecting children with all backgrounds from every imaginable source that you can imagine. This is the most undiscussed issue in the United States is the exploitation of our children. And it's a mindset in the United States that has been established that says exploitation is okay. To exploit another human being is okay. And what it's doing is it's creating a culture where these things are no longer even a huge priority to be addressed. And so if you can justify the exploitation of children in the womb, then why can't you justify the exploitation of children out of the womb? So it's a very complex issue. It's something that even the body of Christ is not talking about readily. And that is something that we're passionate and empower the fight, which is empowering safe adults in children's lives to be educated to prevent and to stop the exploitation of children that are right around them.
Well, that statistic is stunning. And to think that it's going on in homes, as you said, every kind of home. And
Yep.
one of the reasons for this program is we're trying to alert the church to
Exactly.
the issue.
I'm curious as we talk about this, obviously there's a wide variety of things that fall into child exploitation. But as we talk about specifically trafficking and prostitution, what happens if a child becomes pregnant as a result of this?
Well, is that something, Jen, you want to actually talk about, or is that something you want me to address?
Oh, we might both comment. I think we're all aware that trafficked children end up in our local hospitals for a host of reasons. And we know that traffickers force abortions on young girls and women. And the data isn't necessarily available because we're not going to talk about that. But we know that it exists because you can inquire with a woman that has escaped or walked away from that entrapment, and she will most often say, yes, I was forced to have X number of abortions during my time in prostitution.
There's a story. I have a friend who's a local forensic nurse at the children's hospitals that we have here in the Kansas City metro area. And she was telling me a story of a child who came in, a 17-year-old girl who was obviously showing signs of being trafficked. So they started asking some more questions and had her fill out a form. And in this form, she listed at the age of 17, she had already had 11 abortions and marked that every single one of them was forced. And this is the sobering reality behind these issues that we talk about on a national level, that people don't really realize the implications that are happening to the most vulnerable among us, which is children. When they can go into a crisis pregnancy, or not a crisis pregnancy, but they can go into a Planned Parenthood and have a non-parent consented abortion, this is enabling trafficking to continue. This is enabling, because most of the time trafficking, especially of teens, occurs while they're living at home and going to school. This is happening right under their parents' noses. So one of the only things that may be alerting the parent that the child may be in a situation is a pregnancy. So when that child is able to go into a Planned Parenthood and have a non-parent consented abortion, what you're doing is you're allowing the entrapment of that young girl to stay in trafficking.
So it's something of a rhetorical question, I suppose, but it's fair to say that the issue of child exploitation has certainly contributed to children that are being sent for these abortions.
Absolutely. It's a mindset, is what we like to try to call it. In training, we actually use a tree analogy, and we call it the tree of exploitation. And we bring up all of these different fruits that we talk about, from suicide to child profiteering, is where we put abortion, and social media and sex trafficking and drugs and addictions. And we talk about all the fruit that this tree produces. And we go down into the root system and we go, okay, what is the roots of this? And what is the seed that was planted that created this tree to grow in the first place? And there's several key factors here is that a tree that produces bad fruit always starts from a seed. And statistically, 80% of all of our top social issues come back to the same seed that started it all, which is being exploited as a child. It's child exploitation. Trauma in your childhood creates statistically most of our social issues, statistically over 80% of them. So if we want to stop drug addiction and crime and violence and sex trafficking and all of these things, we have to start protecting our children. We have to. We are dealing with the fruit of this rotten tree. And what did Jesus say to do with the rotten tree? He didn't say to tend it and care for it. He said to chop that thing down and throw it into the fire. And what we're passionate about at Empower the Fight is to empower people to recognize what that tree of exploitation is, that it's a mindset, that it's okay to use another human being for someone else's gain or benefit. It's okay to treat a human being like an object. That mindset is what needs to be chopped down and thrown into the fire because it's actually anti-Christ. It's opposite of who Christ is because he came for the broken. He came for people. So when we are partnering or complying with any form of an exploitive mindset, we are actually partnering with something that's anti-Christ, anti who God is, because he came for human beings. And we need to start having this discussion in the body of Christ. And instead of letting culture dictate to us what is right and wrong, instead of going back to the core simplicity of the gospel of this is who Jesus is. He is for people. So anything that is anti-person or anti-people or exploitive is not of God. And we need to cut it out of our lives and out of our children's lives and not to allow it, not dance around it, not sugarcoat it. Call it what it is and get rid of it out of our lives and out of our children's lives.
Well, Katie, that passion is undoubtedly going to give predators heartburn, and
Yeah.
I hope you are giving a lot of it. Well, Jen, then I know the answer, but I guess based upon what has been shared so far, that you would call abortion child abuse.
Agreed. Yes.
How important do you think it is to this whole heinous network?
It's imperative. And I'm confident that if we were to have any frank conversations with staff at your local clinics, they would say, yes, we have traffickers that keep us in business. It's an industry. We know from Susan Johnson's experience that Planned Parenthood is a for-profit model.
You're right.
And we see trafficking on the rise continually for years. And where are these traffickers going to take these young girls to get an abortion? The contraception products that they profit from to begin with, which we know are not effective, and then they bring the girls in for forced abortions.
Well, here's a $64,000 question. How do we stop this, Jen?
Well, it starts with our introductory training in terms of Empower the Fight, which is discussing the issue of exploitation, identifying it, helping the public understand how prolific, how broad this subject is, and that we are all responsible for keeping an eye on the children in our circle of influence. I have 4 nephews that live in town. I am responsible for being invested in their lives, plus another child, whether it's a friend from school or a kid in the neighborhood, but we have got to take our blinders off and pay attention to what is going on around us. Just this morning, after dropping my son off, I'm driving down the street and I see a teenage girl. It's pouring rain this morning. She has no umbrella, no hat. It's 40 degrees. She's wearing a midriff top and she's not even going in the direction of the school. Where is she going? Why isn't somebody taking this young girl to school?
Katie?
Well, it's like what Jen said in our core training, we talk to people about how to recognize the different signs in order to safeguard and protect children. A big part of that training also includes the importance of parents not to just tell their children that they love them, but that they are intrinsically valuable. that not based on if they've done anything right or wrong, but that child is valuable simply because they're human. And that's the way God views them. And that's the way they're viewed by the adults in their life. And this is a very simple, powerful thing that we can start to do as adults, not only in the lives of our children, but the children around us, is start talking to them about their intrinsic value. You are valuable because you're human. You're valuable because God made you. You are incredibly valuable. And what you do by sowing those seeds of value into the life of children is when a false love comes around, they can recognize it. When a pimp starts to try to groom and lure them into trafficking, they recognize that false love because they know their value. Because exploitation starts really gradually and really subtly, and it's little things that actually pull them in, that it begins to devalue them. And so the moment that early on they can understand that they're so valuable, when someone starts to speak to that message that has been planted in their heart, that seed that gets planted in their heart, that they're valuable not because of what they do, but because of who they are and because they were created, and that Jesus came for them as a human being, then what it does is that false love no longer is tempting. And in addition to value, another thing that adults can really do, it's very, very simple. I'm really big about simple things that we all can do as a society. We can give children a sense of value, but we can also give them a sense of that they belong. All of us as human beings want to belong. We all want to be part of something. We all want to be special. And so something as simple as telling a child that they belong and that they're part of your life or your circle or your sphere of influence or your youth group or your church, it gives them a sense of belonging and value, that we're so glad you're with us here. I even tell my children when they come home from visiting with a relative, there's always that awkward transition back home. And I've adopted 3 kids out of foster care in addition to my biological child. And so there's a lot of rejection there. There's a lot, they all have their own stories of trauma. And so when, for example, my son comes home after visiting Nana at Nana's house, he's in that weird place of you've been conducting your life without me. Now that I've been at Nana's, am I still wanted? Do I still belong? So something as simple as pulling him aside and doing something fun with him and just like, you know what? We missed you so much while you were gone. And we kept on going on with life, but you weren't here to bring us your silly jokes, or you weren't here to do this or that. And what it does is it shows that child that they belong with your family. And that sense of belonging is very, very powerful. That's how a lot of these trafficking lure victims into their circles is, well, we'll give you a place to belong. We'll treat you well. We'll value you. And it's that false love. And when they experience true love, true acceptance, true value, not based on their actions, but just because of who they are, then what happens is that child is not going to be tempted to go down those roads as easy. And so those are things we all can do. Like every single one of us can do that. We say a lot as an organization that very few of us are on the front lines of rescue, but every single one of us are on the front lines of prevention and early intervention. Every single one of us can prevent harm to children by being engaged.
Well, and that's a very good piece of this conversation, which has sickened me, by the way. And I hope that our listeners feel the same way and are moved by what you two have been talking to us about. I'd like, for the benefit of our listeners and Victor and myself, to talk about some specifics. And what are some of the warning signs that we should be watching out for?
Many of the warning signs of a child being exploited is a child who's shut down, is one who becomes withdrawn, a change of behavior. A lot of times through kids' developmental phases, we tend to go, oh, well, they're in that phase, especially that preteen phase where we're going, oh, well, they're just in that phase. They don't want to talk to mom and dad anymore, or they're just shut down. And the reality is that a lot of times those are warning signs that we can look for. We can look for a child who's being shut down. We can look for them that they're being withdrawn. We can look for kids who say things like, well, you don't understand, or you don't get it. Those are all warning signs that we can look for. in training, we dive into a lot of details of what specific skills you can acquire on what kind of countenance you can look at in a child of all ages and things of that nature that's hard to do in this forum. But there's a lot of different things you can look for: change of eating habits, change of school, change of engagement with the family. If any of my kids just start to where they don't want to come down with the family and participate in the family, that's a big warning sign for me, is that I engage with them and try to figure out what's going on in their life. There's those things that we really can look for, because kids don't know how to process things. Often they don't have the maturity or the ability to articulate what's happening. And so it's really important that we are alert as adults, that we look for anything that's just odd. And what we say in training is, if you don't remember anything else we say, remember this: listen to your gut. If your gut is telling you that something is off, dive in and don't give up until you feel that you know exactly what's happening. And that is something we all have internally. Even if you haven't been through training, as someone who is on the front lines for years fighting for children, the biggest message that I have to adults, safe adults, is listen to your gut. Listen to those things, because it is a prompting of the Lord for you to actually engage in a situation. Don't dismiss it. Don't minimize it. Dive in and try to figure out what's going on.
And when you dive in and are persistent, your children will know that you're not going to let up until you get an answer. And so maybe they'll be more forthcoming. Jen, what would you like to add to the conversation?
I would rather err on the side of caution than to let a situation pass that and then feel guilty that I didn't say anything at the time. I know we always talk about females have an innate gut instinct, but I think God probably gave men the same thing.
Yes, God has wired our brains to provide and protect, and those antennae are up there when the protection issue comes up. What kind of exploitation have you seen? And is this given to a certain part of the country that you see this exploitation? Give us a sense of what you are seeing as people who are on the front lines.
Well, I don't see it as readily in white suburban America. These kids, and I'm not in the schools. If I were a teacher, I might see it more. But my personal experience when it was in my face was traveling to Thailand and South Africa, where children are unaccompanied. They've come from poor villages, and the parents naively give them over to somebody that says, we're going to educate them. We're going to put them in a private school. They're going to be able to have a job afterwards. So let us take care of your child. And it's a foreign concept for most of us in America to imagine that anybody would do that. It does happen here. And in the case of South Africa, an entire generation was wiped out from the AIDS pandemic. And there are child-headed homes with no protection. There's no adult taking care of these siblings. And they are vulnerable and prone to being found and trafficked.
Being familiar with South Africa, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes, we've actually seen it too. Katie, what would you like to add?
Well, here in the United States, it definitely looks different than it does overseas, right? It's very black and white and pretty easy to spot just in those international circles. Here, it's a lot more subtle. It's a lot harder to see, but it's still happening here. So what we see in regards to exploitation is we see all types of exploitation. The one thing that we need to understand, especially in the body of Christ, is that physical and sexual exploitation always start with psychological exploitation, psychological abuse and control and harm. So you're going to see that in a lot of different environments, from even school systems to things like, where is there a narrative where the mind of our young people is trying to be swayed and that they're being controlled and manipulated? And that control and manipulation is what then helps lead into physical exploitation. And so that is a way that we see it here in the United States. That's an obvious way we see it, but we don't know it's exploitation. We go, well, they're just giving their perspective or they're just giving their viewpoint. It's one thing to give your viewpoint and let someone choose it. It's another thing to actually try to manipulate and control a child in their belief system. So the idea of putting pornographic books in schools is an example of that, of going, we're not just giving you, options of what you want to believe. We're actually trying to retrain and manipulate your view of yourself and others. So those are things that I look at as this is the way it looks in the United States. Is it's not this blazing thing that you're going to see on the side of the streets, but do we have a problem with physical exploitation of children in this country? You better believe it. But we've got to look beyond the facade, because when we're seeing sex trafficking in the United States, we're not seeing girls in chains. We're not seeing the way it was portrayed, like in the Sound of Freedom movie. We're just not. It's not the way it looks here. Here, it looks like drug trafficking and prostitution and escort services and pornography. That's the way it looks like here. And so we're constantly in the United States struggling with this narrative that just because it's not obvious, it's not existing. And that's not true. Evil thrives in the midst of darkness, not light. And so we need to understand that just because it's not obvious, that doesn't mean that it's not occurring, and that the exploitation of children is broad. I mean, we've seen all kinds of types of exploitation, from trafficking to physical abuse to sexual abuse to coercion into abortion, all kinds of things that we're seeing where it is exploiting our children. The pornographies in the schools, all of these things are exploitive, and it's grooming our children for physical and sexual exploitation later. And it's time that we wake up as citizens and as members of the body of Christ and begin to understand that it's not going to look like it does in Africa. It's going to look different here, but the fight is still as intense here.
Jen?
Currently, we just had a new satanic club approved and started in Olathe Northwest High School. And it is supported by the satanictemple.com, based in Texas, that opened the Sam Alito Abortion Center. So you parents that are indifferent here in the Johnson County public school districts, you better pay attention. Your kids are going to be exploited through the satanic club at school.
I guess a follow-up question to that is, do you have stories of exploitation that you can share personally, that you've witnessed or experienced? Katie?
Many. One of the ones that's always the near and dear to my heart was a local situation where there were toddlers who were being trafficked.
Toddlers.
And so, to not go too heavy for our audience, it was horrific. It was so bad it made international news. And these were children that are beautiful. They're safe now. They're in a great situation now. They're protected. They live with a Christian family. They're loved. They're provided for. I see them every year. But that was the particular case that shook my world. And I was seeing a lot on the front lines of rescue and also in the front lines of advocacy. I was seeing a lot of different things, but that was the particular case that made me wake up and go, evil knows no limits. No limits. There are no limits when you're talking about evil. There is no boundary line it will not cross. There is nothing that is off limits. And a passion in me, because so much of what I see in especially our church culture, but also our American culture, is we almost have PTSD when this stuff comes to light. And it's like, oh no, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that. And my appeal to especially the body of Christ is, let's look at history. Evil has proven it has no limits. We have got to stop being so shocked and understand how evil works. Evil does not have a boundary line. It will not go, oh, I'll come up to here and stop. No, evil will always go beyond that boundary line. The Lord is the one who creates those boundary lines, and evil always bypasses that. And it's time for us to understand that nothing is off the table to consider. And a lot of it is because we were made for love, right? We were not made for evil. So we can't comprehend it. God made us for love, to be loved by others. He made us to look at and relish being loved. And so when evil comes into the middle of the picture, it's hard for our human hearts to process. And there is a place where we can't even try to figure it out, because if we do, then you go down a rabbit hole that's really dark and it's really hard to come back from. That's not what we're wanting people to do. What we're wanting people to do is to go, evil has no limits. I was made for love. We as human beings were made for love. But at the same time, we need to understand the way evil works and not ask why it works that way, but ask what it is that we can do. And what can we do in order to make sure that evil doesn't get its foothold in our lives and in our children's lives and the children around us? Because there's nothing off the table in regards to what evil will do and how far it will go.
Just for clarification regarding those toddlers, we're talking about sexual.
They were being sexually trafficked.
Good Lord. So people listen to what she's saying. Listen to how we can take a part in having an impact. We can't end it all, but we can do our part in our
Yes.
little world. And we've talked about how we can prevent this. Is there anything that hasn't been mentioned that should be?
I genuinely believe the biggest obstacle that we're dealing with is the majority of American people think we need to wait for our government to do something. And if you look at the history of the United States government shifted when the people rose up and said, this needs to change. That's the way our government was founded, was the people. We, the people, are the answer for these changes that we seek. And it's time that we, the American people, go, this is not okay for us. We are not going to just sit back and wait for our government to get a heart. I mean, why are we expecting that? Instead, what we need to do is what our founding fathers did, which was, no, we, the people, are going to tell you, the government, what needs to happen here. And that's the way we were founded as a country. But yet we've been lulled to sleep to a degree, especially in the body of Christ, of, well, we're going to wait, or we're going to put this person in power and we're going to elect this particular person. And I mean, hear me out. I'm not saying that elections don't matter. They do matter. What I'm saying is that there is a movement of the people that says, this is not okay. We are drawing a line in the sand. We are saying that it's not okay to exploit our children. We're saying it's not okay to exploit us as adults. We're saying that exploitation in the United States is not acceptable. That we, the people, are going to come together and we are going to hold accountability to our leaders, because they will not hold each other accountable. They have proven that through the decades, that accountability will never occur within the government structure. Accountability is to the people. And exactly how to do that, I don't know, but I do believe it starts with being a voice. I do believe it starts with each of us engaging and learning what it is that we can do and taking charge over our children's lives and saying, no, we're going to get engaged. We're going to get engaged not only in our children's lives, but in the lives of one more child. And that's doable. That's easy. That's not so overwhelming. I'm not asking people to get on the front lines of rescue with me. I get that's hard. The majority of people can't do that. But you can protect the kids around you. You can protect the kids in your sphere of influence. You can speak up for them. You can learn what it is that you need to do to safeguard and protect them. And you can be the voice instead of just sitting back waiting for policies to change. We need to change our mindset, especially in the body of Christ, and to set a narrative that is Christ-like, that says the protection of children is our top priority as a society, because those children are our future adults. They are our future leaders, and we must engage in these issues.
That's so true. What sort of training do you provide and implement? Because people have to be involved in this. And I think that training, like you mentioned, is so important.
Yeah, we offer like a 1 hour introductory training called Empower Safe Adults, which just kind of gives an overview of a little bit of what we've talked today. And then we also offer a more in-depth training, which is a 4 hour training called Watchful Eye. What does it mean to be a watchful eye in the lives of children? What are the details of things that you need to look for? Where are safe spaces and unsafe spaces? How does perpetrator behavior work? What are the patterns of behavior to look for? How does technology play its role in all of this stuff? What is creating a demand for things like sex trafficking and child pornography? And we dive into all of those really complex things. That's a 4-hour training called Watchful Eye. By the end of the month, we should have those available and ready online for people to take. It might be the first week of February because we're waiting on some editing and things of that nature. But those are some resources that we're going to have very readily available very soon for the public across the country, that they can go to our website, stopchildexploitation.org, and be able to take the training online. So those are some resources that we provide as a way to safeguard and protect and prevent the harm of children.
Jen, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, back to the Satanic Club. At Empower the Fight, we want people to think solution-minded. And when the concerned moms in my community were appalled at what was going on, one of them spoke up and said, well, I'm going to bring treats. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be intentional and have an adult that is outside of their circle of influence tune in and report back. You can pick a battle, whatever battle it is, and get involved. Invite the kid down the street over for dinner. Get to know their parents or the single parent. Get to know your single parent that's in the neighborhood. That single parent needs help keeping an eye on their kids.
So you're talking, Jen, about a physical presence at these meetings at the Satanic Club.
Yes.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for the information that you've shared with us today. It is mind-boggling, and at the same time, I guess we shouldn't be surprised. As Katie said, evil has no boundaries. And when we understand that, I think the other things come into place in the Christian mind as what we need to do and how we need to be engaged. So Katie and Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
You know, Brad, this conversation, it hits you like a truck. It really does. It's hard to think of anything more horrible than what's happening to these children across the country. And, you know, at least in me, it lights a fire to hear these stories and to think about this stuff. It makes you want to go charge the gates. What can we do? How can we get more involved to help these children? Because it's just so important. And there's hardly a more deserving cause than protecting children from exploitation.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, my goal in life is not to say words that should not be used where families are involved. And that is stretching it today, because I'll tell you, I am so angry with what we've heard. And my first thought is grab a baseball bat and dole out some justice. Let's get this taken care of. But of course, that's not the way it's supposed to be done. So what we have to do as listeners is pay attention to what we can do in our own little world, and then go about doing it. Don't sit down. If you sit down and not act on this, then you are part of the problem.
Yeah, that's true. And Brad, you know, the baseball bat reaction, I think, is natural to every man who hears a program like this, just because of our innate desire to protect from monsters. And that's what they are, anyone who would do this to a child. But of course, as you said, that's not the approach that we ought to take. But for anyone who, like me and like you, is fired up about this and wants to make a difference, I want to encourage everyone to go to lifeissues.org, where you'll find resources about how we can effectively make a difference, what we can look for, the training that was mentioned in today's program. Once again, that'll be available on lifeissues.org. I also want to encourage you to become a life defender today. Be a daily part of our work to save babies and promote a culture of life across America. Giving monthly in any amount is a tremendous commitment to the pro-life movement. We can't all be sidewalk counselors, and we can't all be on the front lines of defending children from exploitation, but we can support vital pro-life education through monthly donation. It allows us to reach more persuadable people with an important message, and it enabled the creation of this very program. Help us do more for the babies and the children by becoming a life defender today. You can easily sign up on our website. Once again, that's lifeissues.org. And be sure to tune in next week for more straight talk on life issues.